Cole, thank you so much for joining me here today in the studio. It's a pleasure to have you.
Thank you very much.
I've got Carl here with me today, a senior HR professional with a wealth of country knowledge. I think you mentioned you've supported over 20 countries during your professional career so far.
Absolutely, yes.
And the subject that I think you and I have spoken about a lot recently is the changes across employment law and legislation, which I know doesn't necessarily sound the most attractive, but it's something that a lot of financial services businesses are tackling at the moment. Given your wealth of experience across various different countries and also your experience from an employee relations perspective, I was quite eager for you to almost talk through some of the top tips for businesses and HR professionals that are navigating the legislation and the law change that isn't necessarily cemented in businesses just yet. So what are your thoughts on the future and how to prepare, Carl?
It's a broad topic that we're going to cover today. I think first and foremost, my first piece of advice would be try to calm down and don't panic. Yeah. Because a lot of what is being talked about in the HR media is legislation that doesn't actually exist yet. And so there's a lot of speculation. I can definitely sense that people are nervous about that because they're trying to plan for the unknown. And it's an unknown that's probably going to change quite radically between today and whenever that legislation comes into effect. You know, the Employment Rights Act in the UK is a great example of that. And so my best piece of advice, I think, today would be focus on what is guaranteed to come in to force at some point in time and plan for that and build it into your existing roadmap. We know from 2026 that the EU Pay Transparency Directive will essentially be mandated for the vast majority of organisations operating in the city that meet the size threshold. And that has some pretty far-reaching consequences, and it may be that some organisations already have a lot of the infrastructure they need to support that. It might be that they're starting from zero. And so focusing on what's known and working towards that and building it into your existing roadmap is definitely where I would start. And I think what's really exciting about all of the different legislation that's coming up in both the EU and further afield is the opportunity for people in your team to step up and take a leadership role from a learning perspective, from an education perspective. If you're in a senior role, you're leading a team, the reality is you don't have time to dig into the micro detail of legislation. Enable your team to step up and learn and take the lead for that. And there are a number of projects that are coming up in the UK, the EU. We know in France and Germany there will likely be some changes from 26, 27. This is a great opportunity to bring it back to a learning culture and make what is a bit of a dry topic a little bit more exciting for teams. And I think the second piece is, once you know where you're focusing, enable managers would be my second piece of advice in that regard, because they're the ones that have actually got to deal with this day to day versus you in an ER role, for instance. Definitely.
And I think that's a really interesting point, and you touched upon almost coaching and enabling your managers, and I think that's something we've had to do as well as kind of talent acquisition professionals, that when we're liaising with an organisation about a new hire and suddenly they list, 15 different countries and they're like, can you find me a candidate who has proficient employment law understanding in all of those different countries? And I'm like, it does exist, but it doesn't, because it's constantly evolving. I suppose another question that I've had from other HR professionals is, where do you find yourself kind of looking, and who do you tend to speak to when you are liaising or supporting a country, for example, that has a bit of a nuance, and you need to find out about some really particular or pinpoint some particular findings for a senior stakeholder? Is that kind of leaning on CIPD, which I don't think many people do, or is it a particular network group that you might be part of?
So I think for anything that might be a little controversial, for instance, I'd recommend building a relationship with a great local legal firm. Okay. A lot of the content that you can get on the CIPD's website, for instance, or in HR newsletters is great while you're kind of building that foundational knowledge. But when you're in the complex scenarios that always crop up in every country, paying a few $100s or pounds or whatever it might be for some great legal advice and pragmatic legal advice, you need to manage those in-country legal professionals in the right way. Otherwise your bill will be pretty high. But making sure that you go in with, this is the outcome that we want, you've got a great relationship and a trusting relationship with your legal counsel, would be my recommendation. Because the reality is you can have experience in 10, 15, 20, 25 countries. you'll never be able to humanely have the knowledge that you need to be a master in all of those countries, because it's such a broad topic and employment legislation literally changes every day. So I think make sure you know your key markets inside out. And if I were an organisation going to market for a new role, there'd be those where I've got the highest employee headcount. And then for those that are smaller, that's when those local relationships really come into their own.
Carl, we sort of connected sort of late last year, I think, and a bit of a trend that I've seen across financial services, and I'm specifically now talking about sort of what we call our boutique market, our asset managers, our private equity firms, our investment funds, where they don't necessarily have massive in-house legal teams or massive ER teams. And a bit of a theme that I've seen is those newly created employee relations roles, which is brilliant. You know, we're finally leaning on that expert that's sat in-house in a business. But what's been slightly different actually is those individuals aren't just necessarily focusing on casework, which typically, if we look at the past, you're sat there, you're running through your employee relations cases. This particular focus has been more around almost the strategy and what the business is predicting for the future, coaching stakeholders around how do we prepare ourselves for changes in both employment law, employee relations, legislation, everything we've led back to. So I suppose that brings me on to the point of you being in the HRC. What do you predict we will see more of as we move into 2025, 2026, kind of specifically in financial services for kind of London and maybe globally as well?
The continued investment in employee relations and total reward roles will definitely be front and center in the financial services space as we look ahead this year and next. The realization that there's a massive amount of value in investing in specialists versus generalists is present in the market, and we can see that with recent trends. More and more organizations are going to tap into that and realize the benefit of it. And you think about an employee relations role, casework is of course always going to be part of your day-to-day, and that role will help bring down your legal bills. But it's so much broader than that, and the true business partnering from employee relations professionals will become more and more prevalent, and their value add to leaders in these quite difficult and high pressure industries will become more and more evident as we work through the remainder of this year. I think as well, in addition to more specialist roles in financial services, we're going to see much more M&A activity this year, and so getting ahead of that from an HR perspective will be critical, and I think London and New York will play really important roles in that, and potentially Singapore when we think about the Asian markets as well. And so we haven't experienced a lot of that for probably 3 to 5 years, and I think this year is where a lot of that investment's going to unlock. It's going to be an exciting time for organizations, but it's going to involve a different focus to what we've been concentrated on in the past few years.
And I think that just kind of cements the fact that their role of human resources is evolving constantly, right? As you say, the past 3 or 5 years has maybe been, we could call it stable. I suppose the economy hasn't been, but what's needed from a HR professional, and as we move into this year, it will open up doors for a lot of people. And as you say, I think you're spot on around the themes of moving into a bit more of a centres of excellence model, or even just your specialists that work alongside your BPs as well. But Carl, it's been an absolute pleasure having you. So thank you so much. And I look forward to some further partnership this year.
Thank you very much for inviting me along.